Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I wanted to check out another interesting short story from a Black author, as I don't have enough of that in my life. I also don't have a lot of Asian American or just Asian literature in general on this channel. Something I should probably get fixed down the road. But today let's focus on a short story about an informal educator. I am referring to The Lesson by Toni Cade Bambara. For those who don't know, Toni Cade Bambara was an African American writer slash activist slash professor. She frequently wrote about the Black experience in a bunch of different ways, and because she was a professor, she also did research and on the Black experience and other such things. What's interesting about her is that she was, although her name is Toni Cade Bambara, that was not her birth name. She actually changed it later to reflect her West African roots. So strong connection with her ancestral culture there. Unfortunately, she died of colon cancer in the 90s, but she did leave like a bit of a legacy with her work, which some people have regarded very highly. And she is in the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame, which is nothing to sneeze at. So without further ado, let's talk about one of her short stories today. I will do a summary, a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Lesson focuses on a child named Sylvia who I think the story is taking place in the future, where she's recalling an experience in her youth. And so she's just talking about something that happened when she was a child. So she's in New York City, probably in one of the predominantly Black neighborhoods, although it's not specifically said where she is from. That's somewhat related to the story here. A woman named Miss Moore, she doesn't seem to have a first name, moves into the neighborhood, and all of the parents kind of gossip about her because she doesn't go to church. She's college educated. She's a bit of an unusual character, and even the children kind of view her with a little bit of anger. But what's interesting is that because she's college educated, the parents seem to grasp onto that, and so they view Miss Moore as an informal educator for her children because she doesn't seem to teach in the schools, but she still provides the children with some outside education that would benefit them in the long run. But the children aren't really happy with that because they're children and they don't want to be learning during the summer or when school's out. At one point during the summer, Sylvia and her friends have a bunch of plans, but Miss Moore comes by and says, "Okay, we're gonna go downtown to Fifth Avenue to learn about something today." And they do go down to Fifth Avenue, and Miss Moore instructs Sylvia to count out the tip for the driver, but instead of giving the driver any tip, which angers the driver, she just chooses to pocket the money instead, which Miss Moore doesn't say anything about. They end up stopping at a toy store where they look in the windows and they see a lot of very interesting toys, some of which are quite expensive. A sailboat that cost thousands of dollars, an expensive toy clown for $35. And given this story takes place in the 1970s, maybe even before that, where toys were, where that was still, a lot of money. $35 was still a lot of money, especially if you're a person of color and you're not making equal amounts of money to your white counterparts. And so all the children gawk at the toys, especially a paperweight that is very expensive. And the other other kids can't seem to really understand what a paperweight even does. Eventually, Miss Moore invites them to go into the toy store, but Sylvia notes that she feels a bit of shame and she doesn't want to go into the toy store, and she can't really understand, where that shame is coming from. But they all go inside and they take a look at a sailboat that cost thousands of dollars, and they begin to wonder, like, who can afford this, given that their families don't make a lot of money. And Sylvia's friend Sugar begins to speak out and talk about how, like, all of the children there right now, like, they don't eat the amount of food that it would cost to pay for this sailboat. Like, their parents don't make a lot of money, and whatever money does go to food, it's certainly not equal to that of the cost of the sailboat. And so they begin to ask, like, who are these people who can afford this kind of thing again? And Sylvia is kind of unhappy with Sugar speaking out, I think because she doesn't want, like, that voiced out, that inequality, like, it's beginning to dawn on her. And so, like, at the end of the story, Sylvia and Sugar leave, and Sylvia is kind of viewing Sugar with a little bit disdain right there. But they both endeavored to spend the $5 that Sylvia now has any way that they so choose. And so that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, Toni does present a lot of things worth talking about here. One thing that stands out to me is the way this story is written. It's written as though it is presented from Sylvia's memory, where she's recalling the events sometime later, either when she's an adult, or maybe even a few weeks later when she's recalling these events to someone else. I like how that's done. It presents it in a much more casual manner, and it does come off pretty hilarious because the way Sylvia just views Miss Moore with total disdain, because she doesn't want to learn at this point in time. Allow me to read you a quote from this. "So we heading down the street, and she's boring us silly about what things cost and what our parents make and how much goes for rent and how money ain't divided up right in this country. And then she gets to the part where we all poor and live in the slums, which I don't feature, and I'm ready to speak on that. But she steps out in the street and hails 2 cabs just like that. Then she hustles half the crew in with her and hands me a $5 bill and tells me to calculate 10% tip for the driver, and we're off. Me and Sugar and Junebug and Flyboy hanging out the window and hollering to everybody and putting lipstick on each other." And so when you get there, she's just recalling the events, but she's doing very very casual, kind of seat of the pants kind of stream of consciousness, just talking about what's happening and everything that's recalling. I do say, because you're getting this from the perspective of Sylvia, who might not be ready to learn the lessons that she's getting, and because she's so young, like, you're getting a lot of exaggeration. So maybe not 100% truthful. I don't want to call this an unreliable narrator, but it does kind of have that feeling, because like, Sylvia is a child, so of course she's going to view someone who's trying to teach her about something, or view any discomfort as the worst thing in the world. And that's kind of what you're getting here with, like, Miss Moore. Sylvia refers to Miss Moore as a bitch several times, even nappy-headed, just the worst possible insults for Miss Moore. And even when Sugar begins to speak out, like, Sylvia's like, how dare Sugar betray me? That's not right of her. But Sugar is just, talking about the inequality that exists in the world. But Sylvia doesn't want to talk about this, so it's viewed as like a great betrayal of some kind. And I do like how Toni writes this using this style. It's very standout, and it's a lot of fun to read because of that. Another thing that Toni Bambara puts throughout this story is the awareness of inequality and how it makes the children feel. When Sylvia begins to become aware that that the food that she wants is very expensive, but other people can happily afford these expensive toys, these extras in life, like it produces a really rotten, shameful feeling within her. Allow me to read this. Let's go in, she say, like she got something up her sleeve. Only she don't lead the way, so me and Sugar turn the corner to where the entrance is. But when we get there, I kinda hang back. Not that I'm scared, what's there to be afraid of, just a toy store. But I feel funny, shame. What I got to be ashamed about? Got as much right to go in as anybody, but somehow I can't seem to get hold of the door, so I step away from Sugar to lead, but she hangs back too, and I look at her and she looks at me, and this is ridiculous. I mean, damn. I've never been shy about doing nothing or going nowhere, but then Mercedes steps up, and then Rosie Giraffe and Big Butt crowd in behind and shove, and the next thing we all stuff into the doorway with only Mercedes squeezing past us. And it's really interesting that both Sugar and Sylvia would feel this shame. Like, what do they have to be ashamed about going into this toy store? But the implication is that they're ashamed because they can't afford these toys. And even more so than that, they're ashamed because they know deep down that the reason they can't afford these toys is because there's this sense of inequality, that someone somewhere views them as less than, and because of that, they're not allowed to, or they don't have the opportunity to buy these toys, or something like that. So the shame isn't because they're terrible people or anything like that. The shame comes from the existential, I guess, knowledge that the world is kind of rigged against you. So what's the point of even going into this toy store anyways? Sugar, on the other hand, while they may feel shame, they're more direct in this feeling of this apparent inequality, because when Miss Moore at the end is like, so what have you learned today? Sugar's like, well, there's the fact that, we can barely afford food. Our parents can barely afford to make ends meet. But here are these people out there who have expendable income, who don't seem to be struggling. And what's the deal with that? We don't live in a democracy if there are some people who have to go without, the basics. And we should all be on an even playing field so that if we want, we can afford these toys just like everyone else. And I will say that Bambara is very overt with that message, but I'm fine with that, because sometimes you need to acknowledge and point out the inequalities in the world, and it doesn't pay to be subtle about it in any way. Especially Ralph Ellison in Invisible Man was very direct and apparent with the inequalities that exist in the world. And sometimes you need to be very overt and not let the message slip by. Say what you're going to say. And I love that about Toni Bambara. Although my issue is that maybe a preteen wouldn't be so vocal about the inequalities that exist in the world, because they might not have the means to express that yet. But that's a minor issue there. But I do think this is an appropriate example for children, the intended audience of this story, because the children, they probably wouldn't understand like housing inequalities or the grand overarching systemic racism that exists. They might not have the tools to grasp such large concepts, but they can understand the inequality from the point of a toy store, and seeing the haves and the have-nots, and the how the system might be rigged in some sort of way so that only certain types of people can afford stuff at this toy store. Because the question is then, okay, why can some people afford these toys while other people can't? Well, Sylvia and her family, they have to pay for food. But why can they only afford food? Well, they don't get paid enough at their job. Well, why don't they get paid enough at their job? And then the question keeps growing until the obvious answer is, we live in a racist society and it's rigged against people of color. And children can easily step up towards that message. And Toni Bambara does a great job with expressing that. And so I really have to give her kudos for making a story that is good for adults, but it also is very helpful for children who might need to maybe have a more simplified way to understand the racism and prejudice that exists in the world. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Lesson by Toni Cade Bambara, a pretty wonderful short story about, the systemic racism and prejudice that exist in the world, told through the eyes of a preteen, or I don't know their specific age, something like that. I'm definitely going to recommend it to you out there. It's a fairly short story, short story. So, wouldn't take you too long to read, but even if it was long, I still recommend it because, the way Toni Bambara tells the story and the message that she's trying to get across it's important to read. If you read the story before, or you simply want to comment on something I said in my review, please do so below in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Let's have a discussion about these ideas. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about Toni Bambara. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and learning travels. Farewell.